The wind that swept across the Nebraska prairie carried the scent of dust and old regrets. The McAllister farmhouse stood in the middle of it all, weathered, gray, its porch boards creaking with every gust like a tired old man sighing against time. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and tension. Nita stood by the kitchen doorway, her brown hands still damp from the wash basin. The fire in the stove snapped and hissed behind her. She could hear raised voices from the front parlor, Mr. McAllister's sharp as a whip crack, and his daughter's higher, trembling, like a violin string pulled too tight. "I won't live with some dusty rancher in the middle of nowhere." Evelyn's voice broke the stillness. "I won't spend my life among cattle and mud like some farmer's wife." A chair scraped the floor, then her father's voice thundered through the house. "That rancher's name is Jesse Hartland, and he's a good man. His father was my father's brother-in-arms. A promise was made, Evelyn. A promise sealed before you were even born. A McAllister's word is a bond." Nita froze where she stood. The name Jesse Hartland had come up before, in whispers and arguments muffled behind closed doors. A man from Wyoming territory, a veteran like Mr. McAllister, the one Evelyn was supposed to marry. "Then break it," Evelyn shouted back. "We're not living in the last century, Father. I'm not marrying some stranger just because you made promises over whiskey and war stories." There was the crack of a hand striking wood, the table maybe, or something heavier, then silence. When Thomas McAllister finally spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. "You'll do as you're told." "No," Evelyn whispered, tears sharp in her voice. "You can't make me." The door to the kitchen opened so fast it startled Nita. Mr. McAllister's tall frame filled the doorway, his eyes storm gray and tired, fixed on her. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind rattled the shutters. Evelyn stood behind her father, arms crossed, face pale and defiant. Mrs. McAllister sat near the window, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. Then Thomas said it, words that would change all their lives. "You owe this family your life, girl. You'll go in her place. A McAllister bride he'll have, one way or another." Nita's breath caught. She glanced at Evelyn, hoping for some spark of kindness, but the young woman only turned her face away. Mrs. McAllister began to cry quietly. "Thomas, please." But the man wouldn't yield. "Our name means something," he said. "Hartland's coming for a McAllister bride, and he'll get one." Nita stood very still. She could have refused. She could have reminded them she was no McAllister, just the Apache girl they'd taken in years ago after the cavalry burned her village. She cooked their food, mended their clothes, slept in the attic above the kitchen. She didn't owe them her life, and yet she owed them shelter, the years they'd kept her alive when she had nowhere else to go. "I'll go," she said softly. Margaret McAllister let out a sob, pressing a hand to her mouth. Evelyn's blue eyes flashed with something unreadable, relief, maybe shame, maybe both. Thomas nodded once, as if closing a business deal. "You'll leave Thursday. Pack what little you own. Tell him the truth if you must, but go." That night, Nita lay awake in her small attic room, the wind howling around the eaves. The few things she owned fit neatly into a small wooden trunk. A faded dress, a comb made from bone, a worn shawl. Before blowing out the candles, she opened a small bundle of letters tied with twine. Jesse Hartland's letters to Evelyn. His handwriting was careful, almost shy. He wrote of his ranch, 200 acres carved from the wilderness, a home he'd built with his own hands. He wrote of the wind that never stopped, of horses that ran wild and mountains that touched the sky. He spoke of loneliness, hidden between lines about cattle, fences, and hard seasons. "I'll come for you soon," one letter said. "Our father's promise will be kept. I'll bring a wagon ready for 2. Nita traced the words with her fingers. There was no anger in them, only a quiet strength. She thought of the man behind those letters, of the land he described, harsh but free. "At least he sounds kind," she whispered into the dark. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie like an old spirit restless for peace. In 2 days, she would leave the McAllisters' house forever, carrying their broken promise and a stranger's fate, toward a land that might finally claim her as its own. The night Nita left the McAllister farm, the air was sharp enough to cut. Frost had already claimed the windows, and the wind sang low across the empty fields. The old coach waited by the split-rail fence, lantern swinging from its side, its wheels half buried in mud and frozen dust. Thomas McAllister didn't come to see her off. Evelyn stayed upstairs behind the curtain, her shadow still and silent. Only Mrs. McAllister stood by the doorway, pressing a small bundle of bread and dried apples into Nita's hands. "God keep you, child," she whispered, her voice breaking. Nita nodded. She didn't trust her own voice. The driver called, "All aboard!" and the horses snorted clouds into the dark. She climbed into the coach, clutching her shawl close around her shoulders. Inside, the air smelled of leather, old tobacco, and cold fear. There were 5 other passengers: a preacher with a cough that wouldn't quit, a heavy-set woman with sharp eyes, a young man heading west to make his fortune, and 2 ranch hands with rough hands and rougher manners. Their chatter faltered when they saw her dark skin, her braided hair, the beaded leather around her wrist, an Indian girl among them. No one said it out loud, but the space between them thickened like fog. The coach jerked forward, creaking down the frozen road. The lamps outside flickered and died as they left the last traces of town behind. Hours passed. No one spoke to her. They didn't need to. Their glances did enough talking. But Nita didn't bow her head. She'd learned long ago that shame only grew if you fed it. She stared out the frosted window, where the moon hung low over the plains, silver light cutting across the emptiness. The land didn't care who she was. The land never did. When morning came, the sun rose weak and pale through the haze. The stage stopped at a relay station where horses were changed and coffee poured thin as water. The air smelled of smoke, bacon, and dust. The preacher offered a polite nod when she stepped down, but the others still kept their distance. Later that day, one of the women, Mrs. Craddock, she'd said her name was, began coughing hard, her face turning the color of ash. The young man beside her shifted away, muttering. Nita leaned forward. "Ma'am, take this." She pulled a tin cup from her bundle and poured what little water she had left. When that wasn't enough, she removed her thin shawl and wrapped it around the woman's trembling shoulders. Mrs. Craddock blinked at her, confused, maybe ashamed. "You'll freeze," she rasped. "I'm used to it," Nita said softly. For the rest of the trip, no one looked at her quite the same. The young man offered her jerky without a word. The preacher blessed her before they reached the next stop. That night, the coach rolled west beneath a sky so vast it made her chest ache. The world here seemed endless, an ocean of grass giving way to mountains, the kind that glowed red at sunset and turned black as coal when night fell. The others slept, heads nodding with the rhythm of the wheels. Nita stayed awake, watching the horizon stretch and break with every rise of the land. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay Wyoming, and the man whose name she now carried on a lie. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out a folded letter, Jesse Hartland's last one to Evelyn. The ink was smudged from years of handling, the paper softened from her touch. She read it again by moonlight. "My father's gone, but I'll keep his word. You'll have a home with me, a place to build something lasting if you choose." His words were steady, not romantic but sure, like a man who built fences straight and spoke plain. Nita closed her eyes and whispered, "Maybe I'll give him one, even if it's not the one he asked for." The wind outside rose, whistling through the cracks of the coach. It sounded almost like a song, half sorrow, half promise. As the miles rolled beneath the wheels, Nita felt the ache of leaving behind everything she'd known. The smell of the hearth fire, the creak of the old attic floor, even the weight of being unwanted. But somewhere deep inside, under all that ache, was a quiet flicker of something else. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Maybe the land ahead would be cruel, the man cold, the winters long. Maybe she'd be sent back with shame heavier than before. Or maybe, in that wide and untamed country, she'd find something that finally felt like her own. The horses snorted as the coach climbed into the rising hills. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, blanketing the trail in white silence. Nita pulled the shawl tighter and whispered a prayer in her mother's tongue. The words meant safe passage, but in her heart, she asked for something more. Let this journey lead somewhere worth arriving. The stagecoach creaked to a stop in front of the Cheyenne station, its wheels screeching against frozen dirt. The air smelled of smoke and horse sweat, thick with the noise of shouting ranchers, barking dogs, and trains sighing steam into the pale morning. Jesse Hartland stood near the hitching post, hat low over his brow, boots dusted from the trail. He looked every bit the Wyoming rancher, lean, broad-shouldered, a man cut from weather and war. His gray eyes scanned each passenger, stepping down, one after another. He was looking for her, the daughter of Thomas McAllister, the girl his father had once promised him, a fair, proper lady raised on a good name and steady upbringing. He imagined her soft-spoken and pale, maybe shy at first, someone who would bring warmth into the cold corners of the house he'd built with his own hands. But when the last passenger climbed down, the world seemed to tilt. She wasn't what he expected. The woman standing before him had dark skin, sun-warmed and freckled by wind, her hair braided tight and streaked with dust. Her dress was plain calico, the color of old wheat, mended so many times it carried the marks of 1,000 days of work. She held a small trunk with both hands, her posture straight, her eyes steady. Those eyes, black and deep as desert midnight, met his without flinching. "Mr. Hartland?" she asked softly. Her voice was calm, melodic, not the timid tone he'd imagined. Jesse took a step forward, confusion flickering behind his stoic face. You're not Evelyn McAllister." The woman nodded once. "No, sir. They sent me instead." The words hit like a stray bullet. "What do you mean, sent you?" His voice hardened, the old soldier's edge returning. Nita took a breath. "They told me to come in her place. I told them it was wrong, but I had no power to stop it." For a moment, no one spoke. The noise of the station faded to a dull hum around them. Wagons, shouting men, whistling trains, all distant now. Jesse studied her, disbelief tightening his jaw. "You're not her," he said again, flat, certain. "No," she answered, her chin lifting just slightly. "But I can keep a promise they couldn't." The words were simple, but they struck deeper than she could have known. He looked at her again, really looked, and saw not shame or deceit, but a quiet defiance, the kind that came from surviving things no one ever asked about. He could have turned his back, could have walked away, left her standing there in the cold. But something in her steadiness, something that didn't ask for pity or forgiveness, held him still. "You told me the truth when you could have lied," he said finally. "That counts for something." Nita bowed her head slightly, unsure whether that was mercy or dismissal. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, sir. Only this." She lifted the small trunk, its corners worn smooth. He hesitated, thumb brushing the brim of his hat. "My wagon's this way," he said at last. His tone was clipped, his expression unreadable. She followed him through the bustle of Cheyenne's main street, past saloons leaking laughter and light, past freight wagons creaking under barrels of whiskey and nails. Her boots crunched against frozen dirt as she hurried to keep pace with him. When they reached the wagon, Jesse loaded her trunk himself, his movements brisk but careful. He helped her climb up to the bench seat without meeting her eyes. As the horses started forward, the last sound of the town faded behind them, replaced by the rhythm of hooves and the creak of old wood. They rode in silence for miles. Jesse kept his gaze on the horizon, where the land rolled open into a sweep of pale gold and gray-blue mountains. The wind tore through his coat and caught strands of Nita's hair, making them shimmer like black silk in the light. Finally he spoke, his voice rough from years of dust and solitude. "You know what they promised me?" She looked over, unsure if it was a question she was meant to answer. He went on. "A wife, a McAllister bride, someone who'd bring civility to the land, maybe raise a family here someday." Nita's fingers tightened around the shawl in her lap. "I can't give you that name," she said softly, "but I can keep your word." Jesse exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. He didn't respond, but his hands loosened on the reins. The sky turned gold, then copper, then the deep bruised purple of evening. In the distance, the first outline of his ranch appeared, a lonely house set against miles of grassland and silence. He spoke once more, without looking at her. "We'll talk in the morning. For now, you'll have a roof." Nita nodded. The wagon rolled on, cutting a trail through the frozen prairie. The last light caught her face, and for the first time since leaving Nebraska, she allowed herself to breathe. She had kept her word, and though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, something in Jesse Hartland's voice, that reluctant fairness, told her that maybe, just maybe, the West wasn't finished with her yet. The road to the Hartland Ranch wound through empty miles of grass and stone. The sun had fallen behind the mountains, leaving only streaks of orange fire along the horizon. Jesse didn't speak as he drove. The reins moved in his hands with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than among people. When they reached the ranch, the last light was gone. What stood before them was wide and lonely, a stretch of land that seemed to breathe silence. The house was built solid from pine and stone, its windows dark, the barn leaning slightly in the wind. A lantern burned on the porch, a single star of light against the dusk. Jesse tied the horses, then came around to help Nita down from the wagon. His touch was brief, careful. "Watch your step," he muttered. She followed him inside. The main room was clean but cold. The fire in the hearth had long since died, and the air smelled faintly of iron and dust. There was a table built by hand, a rifle hanging above it, and a rocking chair that looked like no one had ever used it. "This is the ranch," Jesse said flatly. 200 acres of cattle, fences, and long winters. Nita nodded once, setting her small trunk by the wall. "It's quiet," she said. "Most folks don't like quiet," Jesse replied, hanging up his coat. "I do," she said simply. He hesitated, studying her face in the lantern light. The way her dark eyes reflected the flame, steady but unreadable. "You can stay in the spare room upstairs," he said. "We'll figure what to do come morning." Then he turned away, ending the conversation as neatly as closing a door. Left alone, Nita looked around the house. It was more fortress than home. Every surface spoke of work and survival. Tools, ledgers, rope, saddles, but nothing soft, nothing that belonged to a woman. She could have sat and waited, but instead, she moved. She found matches on the mantel, struck one, and coaxed the fire back to life. The crackle of burning wood filled the silence, and for the first time, the room breathed again. She pulled a pot from the shelf, filled it with water, and set it on the stove. Soon the smell of boiling coffee drifted through the house. Her hands moved by instinct, sweeping dust, straightening a crooked chair, wiping the table with the hem of her shawl. When Jesse came back down a half hour later, he stopped short. The room glowed with firelight. A stew simmered on the stove. The chill had gone, replaced by warmth and the faint sound of humming, a soft, low tune sung in the Apache tongue, like a prayer whispered into the wood itself. Jesse stood in the doorway, boots still on, hat in hand. He watched her move, quiet, deliberate, unhurried. There was no fear in her, no flustered effort to please. She worked like someone who understood both the weight and the rhythm of solitude. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. She turned toward him, the light catching her cheek. "I know," she said, "but cold rooms don't sit well with me." He gave a slow nod, his gaze dropping to her hands. Rough, calloused hands, not the soft, gloved fingers he'd expected from a McAllister bride. She served him a bowl of stew, then sat opposite him with her own. They ate in silence. The fire snapped, filling the pauses neither of them tried to break. After supper, Nita cleaned the table, rinsed the dishes, then disappeared up the narrow stairs. Jesse stayed in his chair by the fire, staring at the flames until they blurred. He told himself he'd send her back in a few days, that he didn't owe her anything, not after this deception. But deep down, something else stirred. She hadn't lied. She'd come carrying someone else's promise and kept it anyway. That night, long after the house went still, Jesse lay awake. The wind howled against the shutters, rattling them like distant drums. Somewhere above from the spare room, he heard it again. That voice. Nita was singing softly in Apache, her tone clear and mournful. It was a song he didn't understand, yet it carried something universal. The ache of old wounds, the fragile hope of peace. Jesse turned toward the wall, but the sound followed him. It wound through the cracks of the house, into the spaces he thought were long empty. He'd known battlefields, thunder, and silence, but never this kind of quiet, the kind that stirred rather than soothed. When her voice faded at last, the night felt heavier, and he realized he hadn't slept a minute. Outside, the prairie stretched infinite beneath the moon, and inside the lonely ranch house, two souls, a war-worn rancher and an Apache woman, lay awake, listening to the same restless wind. By mid-morning, the wind had shifted warm, carrying the smell of sage and horses. Jesse was mending a fence near the yard when he spotted a rickety wagon crawling up the trail. Old mule, cracked wheels, dust billowing behind. He smiled faintly when he saw the woman driving it. Hattie Rose Fletcher, the oldest, sharpest-tongued neighbor within 30 miles. She'd buried 3 husbands, outlived 5 winters no one else thought she'd survive, and had a laugh that could scare crows clean off a fence line. She pulled up, reining the mule hard. "Well, Jesse Hartland," she called, her voice gravel and honey all at once. "Heard tell you finally got yourself a woman up here. Thought I'd see if hell froze over, or if it's true." Jesse grunted, brushing the sweat from his brow. "Not exactly how folks say it." "Uh-huh," Hattie said, her eyes sliding toward the porch, where Nita had stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "That her?" "That's her." Hattie climbed down, bones creaking like a saddle tree. She studied Nita from head to toe. Her sun-browned skin, the braids tied with leather string, the calm, guarded eyes. "You're Apache, ain't you?" "Yes, ma'am." Hattie's grin spread wide. "Well, praise be. Maybe God finally sent the right woman in the wrong dress." Nita blinked, unsure if she was being mocked, but the old woman's eyes were kind. Over coffee, Hattie turned to Jesse, her tone turning softer than her words. "Don't let pride make you blind, boy. You're your father's son, hard as the land, proud as a bull. That woman didn't come here to take nothing that ain't hers. She came to keep a promise no one else would touch." Jesse looked down at his cup, the steam curling between them. He didn't argue. Then Hattie turned to Nita. "And you, girl, don't you bow your head. You didn't steal this life. You earned it. The world don't hand out peace easy, but sometimes it gives you a patch of land to build it yourself." Sharidoi. When the wagon finally rattled away, the house felt warmer somehow. That evening, Jesse caught himself watching Nita more than once. She was out near the corral, sleeves rolled up, working alongside him as the light faded gold. Her hands were strong, her motion sure. She didn't move like someone who belonged to anyone. She moved like someone who belonged to the earth itself. He told himself it was just respect, gratitude maybe, but when she caught his eyes once and smiled, just a small, quiet smile, something unsteady moved inside his chest. 2 days later, the roof beam in the horse shed slipped while Jesse was reinforcing it. The log came down fast, catching his shoulder before he could move clear. Pain ripped through him like lightning. Nita heard the crash and ran out barefoot. She knelt beside him, her hands quick and steady. "Hold still," she said, voice low. "You'll make it worse." "I can manage," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You can't," she said simply. And he didn't argue. She got him inside, cleaned the gash, and bound it with cloth. Her fingers were gentle, her touch sure. When she finished, Jesse noticed her lips moving, a soft murmur in Apache, words that seemed to float rather than fall. "What's that?" he asked. "A prayer," she said, "for healing, for peace." He tried to smile. "Don't waste prayers on me." Her gaze met his. "We don't waste what we give." Then quietly, she said something else that stayed with him. "Among my people, keeping your word makes you part of the earth itself. Break it, and the land turns its face from you." Jesse looked at her, really looked, and felt something shift. She wasn't just brave. She carried her own kind of honor, carved deep, older than the McAllister name, older than any promise written on paper. That night, lying awake, his shoulder throbbing, he couldn't shake her words. She had more dignity in her silence than most folks had in their Sunday clothes. A week later, a young man named Jonah Cooper rode in looking for work, a broad-smiled, golden-haired drifter from down south. Jesse took him on to help with spring repair. Jonah was easy to like, too easy. He talked loud, worked fast, and smiled even faster, especially at Nita. She thanked him politely but kept her distance. Still, Jesse noticed. He noticed every glance Jonah threw her way. Every time Nita's laugh slipped out, light and unguarded, something hot and unwelcome stirred in him. Jealousy wasn't an emotion he'd known in years, and he didn't much care for it now. That night when Jonah joked over supper about a man needing good company out here, Jesse's voice came out colder than he meant. "Mind your manners, Cooper. You're here to work, not talk." The room went silent. Nita lowered her eyes, unsure whether to be angry or grateful. A few days later, Jonah packed up his gear and rode out. Jesse told folks he wasn't fit for ranch work, but in truth, he couldn't stand the way the house felt smaller when another man looked at her. When the dust from Jonah's horse faded down the road, Nita stood at the window watching the horizon. Jesse came up behind her, his arm still in a sling. "I didn't mean to scare him off," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then, "Some men don't know how to act decent around good people." Her breath caught, but she didn't reply. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and golden, wide enough to hide 1,000 things unsaid. The night it happened, the wind came from the south. Hot, restless, carrying the smell of lightning long before the storm. Jesse had gone to the far field to check the fence line, leaving Nita in the house to finish supper. The sky was split open with thunder, but no rain followed, only the dry charge of air that made horses uneasy. When she heard the first crack, it didn't sound like thunder at all. It was the sound of wood breaking, of heat catching breath. She rushed to the door, and her heart dropped. The barn was burning. Flames clawed up the rafters, orange tongues licking at the night. Horses screamed inside, their bodies slamming against the stalls. Nita ran barefoot through the yard, the dry grass scraping her feet raw. "Easy," she shouted, voice breaking. "It's all right. Hold on." Smoke stung her eyes as she wrestled the latch free. One horse bolted past her, another reared and kicked against the wall. Then she saw him, the old black stallion, trapped beneath a fallen beam, eyes wild with terror. Jesse's father's horse, the last living thing from the old man's time, the heart of the Heartland Ranch. She didn't think. She just moved. Nita grabbed a shovel, wedging it under the burning beam. The heat seared her arms, blistering her skin, but she pushed harder until the wood shifted enough for the stallion to crawl free. The horse stumbled out, coughing smoke, and galloped into the rainless dark. When Jesse came tearing back on horseback, he found her still inside, coughing, trying to throw sand over the flames. He leapt from his saddle and dragged her clear, pulling her into the open air. Her shawl was half burned, her hair streaked with ash. "What the hell were you thinking?" he shouted, voice cracking between anger and fear. She coughed, eyes glassy but steady. "The horse was trapped. I couldn't leave him." "You could have died," he said, kneeling beside her, hands trembling as he checked her arms. The skin was red, blistered along the forearms. "Then I'd die keeping something worth keeping," she whispered. Jesse looked at her. The soot smeared across her face, the quiet defiance in her eyes. And he couldn't speak. He wanted to be furious. He wanted to shake her. Instead, he just sat there in the dirt, his throat tight with something he didn't understand. Later, when the fire was out and the night settled heavy with smoke, Jesse cleaned her burns by lantern light. His hands were rough but careful. She didn't flinch once. The silence between them stretched long, filled only by the crackle of dying embers. After a while, she spoke. "In my tribe," she said softly, "fire is both life and death. It takes what it wants, but it gives warmth back if you listen." He glanced up at her, brow furrowed. "You talk like it's a person." "It is," she said. "Everything is. The land, the wind, the animals. We don't own them. We're part of them. When you keep your word, the earth remembers. When you break it, even the wind turns cold." He smiled faintly. "Sounds like something my father would have believed." "Then he was wise," she said. Jesse leaned back, shoulders weary. "He was a hard man. This ranch, it's all he left me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just keeping it alive out of habit." "Maybe," Nita said, "but habit can be holy if it's built on love." The words landed deep. He hadn't heard anyone talk like that in years, not since his mother's prayers or his father's quiet faith in work and weather. They sat like that for hours, trading stories, hers of the Apache way, of fires lit for the dead and songs sung for the living, his of long winters, lost battles, and the heavy silence that followed war. When the lantern burned low, he said quietly, almost to himself, "I thought you came here to replace someone." Then meeting her eyes, he added, "But you came to remind me who I was." Nita didn't answer. She didn't need to. The smoke outside had thinned, but the smell of it lingered. The scent of something old burned away to make room for something new. That night, neither of them slept. The barn was gone, but the old stallion lived, grazing near the fence as the dawn came slow and red. The fire had taken the roof and the wood, but what it left behind was harder to name. Something raw, fragile, alive. And for the first time since the war, Jesse Hartland felt the ache of something that might one day be peace. By late summer, the whispers had spread farther than the wind. From Dry Creek to Laramie, from barrooms to church steps, folks had a new story to chew on. The Hartland boy married a redskin. They said it like it was a sin, a scandal to spice the dullness of prairie life. Some laughed when Jesse rode into town. Others tipped their hats with mock respect. A few spat in the dirt as he passed. Jesse didn't answer any of them. He lived long enough to know that words like bullets only hit what you let them. But Nita heard them too. The women in the general store stopped talking when she entered. The preacher's wife handed her change without meeting her eyes. Still, she kept her head high. She swept the porch, baked bread, and fed the stock every morning before dawn. She didn't need the world's permission to breathe. Then one Sunday afternoon, a fine carriage rolled up the long dirt road toward the ranch. The horses gleamed like polished mahogany. The driver's coat was city-made, the wheels gold-trimmed. When the door opened, Evelyn McAllister stepped down. She was everything the world loved to admire. A lady wrapped in silk and sorrow. Her hat was wide-brimmed, her gloves spotless. But her eyes, they were empty, like glass left too long in the cold. Jesse stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Evelyn," he said, voice even but wary. "Didn't think I'd ever see you out here?" Evelyn smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't. My husband had business in Cheyenne. I took a detour." Nita appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dress was plain, her hair braided and wind-tossed. The two women faced each other, silence stretching between them, the distance between two worlds. Evelyn's gaze flicked over Nita's clothes, her skin, her hands rough from work. "So it's true," she said softly. "You took my place." Nita's voice was calm. "I didn't take anything. I was sent." Evelyn laughed, a brittle sound. "Do you think wearing my name makes you me?" Nita met her eyes, steady and unshaken. "No. It makes me someone who kept your promise when you couldn't." The words landed like stones in still water. Evelyn's lips trembled. "You think that makes you noble?" "No," Nita said quietly. "Just honest." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Jesse stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" She turned to him, eyes flashing, more wounded than angry. "I came for what was promised to my family, to my name. You and I, our fathers bound us long ago." Jesse crossed his arms. "Your father made a promise to mine. So did I. And I kept it." "Ha! By marrying her?" Evelyn snapped, pointing toward Nita. He looked straight at her, calm as stone. "My father made a promise to a McAllister. He never said which one." For a moment, Evelyn's mask cracked. Her breath hitched and her eyes glistened. She looked at Nita again. The girl standing barefoot on the porch, her palms scarred from work, her posture proud. There was something in that steadiness Evelyn couldn't bear. It wasn't victory or defiance. It was peace, the kind she'd never bought, never found in the silks and chandeliers of Omaha. Evelyn turned away, blinking fast. Her gloved hand brushed her cheek, and when she looked down, a single tear fell onto her wedding ring. The gold caught the light of the Wyoming sunset, a tiny fire against her pale skin. She climbed back into her carriage. "You've built yourself quite a life here, Jesse," she said softly. "I hope you can live with it." Jesse's voice was low. "I already am. Mum." The driver flicked the reins and the carriage rolled away down the dirt road, dust rising behind it like fading ghosts. Nita watched until the wheels disappeared beyond the hill. Her heart ached, though she didn't fully know why. Evelyn wasn't her enemy. She was a reflection of the life that could have been if fate had drawn a different line. As the last light bled across the prairie, Jesse stood beside her. Neither spoke for a long while. The land stretched endless before them, and the sky turned the color of old copper. Finally, Jesse said, almost to himself, "The world's got a way of testing what we're made of." Nita nodded. "So does love." The wind stirred between them, carrying the dust of everything they'd lost and everything they'd begun to build. The first chill of autumn rolled across the plains, bending the tall grass in long golden waves. The fire that had burned through the barn months earlier was only a memory now. Blackened timbers rebuilt into something new. The ranch had healed. So had Jesse. Every morning he found Nita out by the corral, hair loose, feeding the horses before the sun crested the hills. Sometimes she sang an Apache, low, steady, ancient, and the world seemed to listen. Jesse watched her from the porch that morning, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The thought that had lived quietly inside him for weeks finally took shape. He went to his workbench in the shed and began to craft something with his own hands, the way his father had once shaped reins and saddles. He cut a length of soft leather, stained it with oil, then carved into it small Apache symbols of wind and endurance, copying them carefully from the patterns Nita had once drawn in the dirt. It wasn't gold, it wasn't polished, but it was honest. That evening, when the sun turned the land copper red, he found her near the fence line, braiding rope. "Got something for you," he said. She turned, squinting against the light. "What is it?" Jesse stepped closer, his face half in shadow, half in sunset. "Something I made. Something I should have given you a long time ago." He took her hand and placed the small leather band across her palm. The symbols caught the last light. Simple, imperfect, but full of care. Nita blinked, confused. "What is it?" He cleared his throat, eyes dropping for a moment before finding hers again. It's what I have to give. You weren't born into my world, but you're the only one who keeps it standing." Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the carvings. "You made this?" He nodded. "Didn't have any gold. Never much cared for it. But this means something I can't buy." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The wind swept through the dry grass, whispering across the valley. Nita's eyes softened, and her lips curved just enough to hold back tears. "You don't need gold to make something sacred," she said. "Only truth." He smiled, slow and unsteady. "Then truth's all I've got." They married the next Sunday, when the sky stretched clean and blue and the air smelled of pine and horses. No preacher came, no church bell rang. There was no lace, no veil, no ring of gold. Only Hattie Rose, 2 ranch hands and the Wyoming wind. The old woman stood between them, hands on her hips, her face lit with a grin. "Ain't much of a ceremony," she said, "but I've seen fancier ones and a whole lot worse." The ranch hands, Tom and Eli, nodded, grinning awkwardly, hats clutched to their chests. Jesse took Nita's hands rough against rough. They stood on the patch of earth between the barn and the corral, the same ground he and his father had once buried a horse, the same ground she'd nearly died to save. He spoke first. "I don't have words fancy enough for vows," he said, "but I'll say this. When the wind's hard, I'll stand with you. When the land gives nothing, I'll still share it. You've given me back more than a man like me deserves. So this..." He lifted the leather band, sliding it gently onto her wrist. "This is my promise." Nita looked down at it, then up at him, her eyes bright and wet. "And I'll keep it," she whispered, "until the wind forgets our names." Hattie sniffed, pretending not to wipe her eyes. "Well," she said, "that's about as good as any preacher could do." The men cheered softly, embarrassed but smiling. Someone handed Jesse a bottle of whiskey. Someone else released the horses into the pasture. The animals ran free, kicking up dust that glowed like gold in the setting sun. As dust settled, Jesse and Nita stood side by side, watching the sky turn violet. No papers were signed, no church bell blessed them. But the land itself bore witness. The earth beneath their boots, the open sky above, the faint sound of coyotes singing somewhere far off. In that moment, it didn't matter what the world called them. Rancher and Indian, husband and wife, sinner and saint. All that mattered was the wind between them, carrying the echo of their promise across the wide, eternal plain. And as the sun slipped away, Jesse reached for her hand, thumb brushing the leather band on her wrist, and said softly, almost to himself, "Guess the good Lord didn't give me what I expected. He gave me what I needed." Nita smiled, eyes on the horizon. "The land does that too," she said, and together they watched the last light fade, the fire of a new life born quietly under the endless Wyoming sky. A year had passed since the fire. The seasons had rolled over the Heartland Ranch like a tide, washing away what was broken and leaving something new in its place. The fields that once lay scorched and brittle now shimmered green beneath the Wyoming sun. The wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers instead of smoke. Even the well, dry and stubborn through so many hard years, now ran clean and deep again. The land had found its way back to life, and so had they. Jesse stood at the fence line one morning, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands. The sunrise spread across the horizon, gold bleeding into pink, lighting the fields that Nita had coaxed back from the edge of ruin. He could see her down by the orchard, her skirts brushing the tall grass, the hem dusted with dew. She was planting late beans, talking softly to the soil as she worked. Not words meant for anyone to hear, but the quiet rhythm of her spirit. Even from a distance, he could see how the earth responded to her, as if it remembered her touch. Children from nearby homesteads often came to the ranch now, chasing after chickens or bringing pails of milk. They called her Mama Nita, their laughter ringing through the yard like wind chimes. To them, she wasn't an Apache or a stranger or anyone different at all. She was the woman who mended clothes, baked bread that tasted like heaven, and never sent them home hungry. The grown-ups had taken longer. At first, they came out of curiosity or guilt. The same folks who'd whispered slurs in town now rode up with baskets of eggs or tools that needed fixing. They lingered longer each visit, tasting her stew, watching her work, seeing how Jesse looked at her like a man who'd found something sacred in a world that rarely gave blessings. By spring, no one in Dry Creek could deny what they saw with their own eyes. The Heartland Ranch was thriving again. The fields produced double what they used to. The cattle grew fat, the horses strong. The apple trees, dead for nearly a decade, bloomed white as snow. One evening, old Hattie Rose sat on the porch with Jesse, watching the children run circles around Nita. "You know, boy," she said, puffing on her pipe, "folks talk about miracles like they happen once in a lifetime. But I reckon they happen slow, quiet, just like this." Jesse smiled, his gaze fixed on the woman in the yard. "Yeah," he said softly, "slow and quiet." Later that night, when the house was still and the stars stretched endless above the plains, Jesse found Nita out by the corral. She was leaning against the fence, listening to the crickets sing. The moon painted her face silver, her braid dark against her shoulder. He came to stand beside her, resting his arm on the post. "The well's full again," he said. "Never thought I'd see that happen." She smiled faintly. "Water returns when the land's forgiven." He chuckled. "You make it sound like it's alive." "It is," she said, looking out toward the horizon. "You just forgot how to listen." He nodded slowly, the truth of it settling in his chest. After a long pause, he said, "The land never cared what color you are, only that you keep it alive, like you kept me." Nita turned her head, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Then maybe the land and I aren't so different." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing against her wrist, where the leather band he'd made her still rested. Worn now, but strong. "I reckon you're right," he said. They stood there for a long time, the wind weaving around them, carrying the faint scent of sage and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the horses shifted in their stalls. The earth felt whole again, not perfect, not tamed, but alive. And in that quiet hour, Jesse realized something he'd never dared to believe. The promise his father made, the one he'd carried like a burden his whole life, wasn't just about land or legacy. It was about finding the heart that could make it worth keeping. He glanced at Nita, the woman who had given life back to the soil, and to him, the land had returned, and so had he. Years passed on the Heartland Ranch, carried by wind and work and seasons. The house that had once stood alone in silence now echoed with laughter. The kind that came from the yard at sunset, when children chased chickens through the dust, and a woman's voice called them in for supper. People still spoke of the Heartlands in town. Some told it like a tale, about the rancher who'd taken in an Apache woman and turned scandal into salvation. Others spoke softer, like it was something sacred. Whatever the telling, they all agreed on one thing: that land had changed because of her. At dawn, Nita stepped out onto the porch, the baby boy cradled in her arms. His hair was dark as midnight, but his eyes, in soft gray, mirrored the Wyoming sky before a storm. A child born of two worlds, carrying the quiet strength of both. The morning was cool, sweet with the scent of alfalfa and river mist. Out in the pasture, the horses moved slow, their coats glinting gold beneath the rising light. She could see Jesse by the fence, hat low, boots planted firm in the earth he'd spent his life taming. When he turned and saw her there, the baby on her hip, the sun catching her hair, a smile creased the weathered lines of his face. He walked up the slope, every step sure and steady, like a man coming home again. He stood beside her, hand resting on her shoulder, and looked out at what they'd built. Fields that shimmered green, fences straight and strong, orchards heavy with fruit. Life where once there'd been nothing but ash and drought. Nita glanced at him, warmth in her gaze. "He'll grow up knowing both sides of who he is," she said softly. "Apache and Heartland, land and sky." Jesse nodded. "He'll grow up knowing this place belongs to him, not because of who his folks were, but because of what they kept alive." He paused, his voice roughened with memory. "Our fathers made a promise long ago," he said, "and now it's finally kept. Not by their words, but by us." Nita smiled, eyes glistening in the soft light. "Then the land remembers," she whispered. They stood there for a while, watching the sun climb higher. The wind came up from the valley, rippling through the grass like waves across an ocean of gold. Behind them, the old barn door creaked open. A colt trotted out, its coat the color of smoke, eyes curious and wild. It ran toward the fence line and back again, kicking up dust that glittered in the light. Life. That was the legacy. By midday, the ranch was alive with sound. The ring of hammers, the call of hawks, the laughter of children helping Nita hang laundry on the line. Jesse fixed a hinge on the gate, humming low under his breath. Old Hattie Rose still visited sometimes, though her hands had grown too shaky to drive. The men from town, once wary, now came for advice on crops and cattle. Even the preacher, who'd once refused to bless their marriage, stopped by to share supper. Time had done what it always does, worn down the sharp edges, left only what mattered. When evening came, Jesse and Nita stood at the edge of the field. The horizon burned red, clouds curling like embers above the mountains. The baby slept in her arms, small chest rising and falling against the rhythm of her heart. "The land's got a way of healing," Jesse said. "So do people," Nita replied. He smiled faintly. "You think they'll still talk about us when we're gone?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they'll just remember the land." Jesse slipped his arm around her shoulders. "That'd be enough." The wind rose, sweeping through the field, bending the grass until it looked like liquid gold under the fading light. There they stood, the rancher and the Apache woman, the child of both worlds between them, framed against a sky so wide it seemed endless. And if anyone had been close enough to hear, they might have caught Jesse's last words, carried softly on the breeze. "Some promises don't die. They just find new hands to keep them." The land stretched on forever, harsh, beautiful, and alive. A living monument to what they had built together. A home born from fire, forgiveness, and the kind of love that outlasts the wind.